consistently demonstrating that he can get along with anyone without losing his focus. For 16 years, he served as president of the Inter-American Development Bank, the largest and oldest bank, and presided over a significant expansion, not only in terms of the bank's financial base, but also in terms of its portfolio. Under his leadership, the Inter-American Investment Corporation, IDB's affiliate, which assists small and medium-sized enterprises, began its operations. And he left a legacy at the bank that is admired very, very much still to this day. But this is not surprising. He came to IDB with a perfect combination of experience and contacts, having served as president of the Central Bank of Uruguay, as secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and as Uruguay's foreign minister. At every juncture along his career path, he made friends and established contacts. And his efforts to make this world a better place did not stop after his years at the Inter-American Development Bank. In 2005, he was designated the first Secretary General of Ibero-America's Secretariat, an organization to facilitate cooperation among Latin America, Spain, and Portugal, and then he was re-elected in 2008. His contributions have been lauded around the globe. He is the recipient of numerous honorary degrees and awards from countries ranging from the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Costa Rica, Spain, France, Japan, and so many more. Enrique, we warmly thank and salute you for all you've done and all you continue to do. And we all look forward to your thoughts on Latin America's regional processes of integration and global insertion. And so the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Carla, for your extremely generous words. I want to tell you too that really I have a big admiration for you, for what you have done, and particularly for your friendship with Latin America. And I remember very well the good old times in which you were U.S. Trade Representative trying to reach one of the major and biggest objectives of our lives in Latin America, to have a real World Trade Organization assuring free trade and equality of opportunities for developing countries. You did a superb job in those days. And you continue your concern and your commitment to Latin America, just helping the dialogue and being present always as a real friend of Latin America. So, and I feel very honored to be your friend too. Thank you very much. I asked Carla if I could use the other language of this meeting, which is Spanish. I know that we must give some chance to our translators to use this, they are English in this body, so if you don't mind, I will try to move my remarks, to make my remarks in Spanish. El título que me...
The title that was given to me to make my comments throughout this 30 minutes has to do with the actual problems of the world and those of Latin America within that world, where we will be finding the very important subject matter well known to all of us, which is the past, present, and future of Latin American integration. Indeed, as a point of fact, we're vis-a-vis a new world, politically speaking, which that great illusion of the 90s is over, when it was stated that history was over. History never ends. There's a never-ending process. Much to the contrary, it becomes ever more complicated day after day. So I deem that indeed we're going through a process in the world today which is quite dangerous, with tremendous instabilities, with a great potential for conflict. Let us look at what is happening in the Middle East. Situations are not only becoming better, but they become worse day by day, with phenomena that truly are known to us in contemporary history, such as those complex and cruel situations we have been observing. Let us see what is happening in northern Africa, what is happening likewise at the border of Russia with the European Union, what is happening on the China Seas. All of these are conflicts that have become worse and which have generated a true feeling that the international system seems to be under tremendous stress, and that in one way or the other, the regulation mechanisms generated after the Second World War are no longer working. And also, we happen to perceive on the part of the USA a certain trend toward going back toward the main commitments accepted in the last 50 or 60 years, which generates another very important vacuum, which we do not know how it will be filled in eventually. So it is indeed a highly dangerous world with components that have become activated in a very dramatic manner, such as the religious component, the struggles which remind us of the Middle Ages. And indeed, within that context, it is very difficult to try to find out, and we have lost the capacity of forecasting things. Trying to do so for more than 2 or 3 years is a true adventure. Recently, I was reading a statement by Olivier Blanchard, the distinguished economist of the IMF, who was asked as to what was the new paradigm of the IMF, of the International Monetary Fund, that countries should follow. He said things are so complicated that now we are moving on a visual tracking. This gives us a very clear idea of the moment we're living through at this point in time. And moving back and picking up some of the points made this morning, the US of A is under clear recovery, economically speaking, with low-quality employment, by the way, with a well-known concentration of income, which is one of the recent issues which have been discussed, trying to resolve complex matters such as the dismantling of the QE, of the quantitative easing, and also the possibility that as a result of this situation, new problems might emerge in the world scenario. Going to Europe, we see that the situation is equally grave and a matter of concern. The countries have not left behind a status of a low growth and recession in some cases even. We have a high rate of unemployment. Even in Spain, we have a 25% unemployment. We see a very dangerous trend, and we're all admirers of the European Union. I think that indeed it has been one of the great conquests of humankind. But today we are concerned with the growth of this Euroscepticism and the movements which are generating a trend against the building of this very large building in the economic history of the world. These are matters of concern to governments, but also for the world, because the European Union is a world power, having one of the most important reserve currencies. And a crisis of this size in the European Union is not just an issue affecting Europeans, but affecting everybody, and also especially Latin Americans, countries which are important associates of it, and they will continue to be so. Besides, we have another issue which emerges as the tremendous headache for the President of the European Central Bank, Mr. Draghi, which is deflation. As it has been stated, there's a problem of dealing with inflation, but deflation, we don't know what to do with it. There is somewhat of bedazzlement as to what to do about it, and otherwise you can ask the Japanese what they think about it. In the case of China, this country has handled very well the regulation of its growth from 10 to 7.5% with tremendous skill and macroeconomic capabilities, but it is becoming prepared to have deep changes in its economic development, seeking out internal engines rather than the motors or engines of exports. This will have its repercussions upon the international trade for Latin America, particularly for South America. All of this brings consequences and implications, and there are concerns also within the Chinese administration for the financial situation prevailing in view of the recessive impact of 2008 and 2009, whether they use a very large credit expansion. The so-called shadow banking might be a problem because of the concern it generates, and all of this brings about worry as regards the future growth of China. And the control of China's growth is a paramount element in the maintenance of the pace of growth in Latin America. I will not discuss Japan because we're familiar with it, a country that has been struggling very valiantly in order to revert 20 years of stagnation. This is an issue which tells us about the difficulties undergone by the system today, and therefore the concessions, the preoccupations that we have to encounter when we deal with this world where we want to become better integrated. What is happening with Latin America? Latin America, first of all, and all these phenomena do have their repercussions upon us, particularly the geopolitical phenomena. There's no doubt that the crisis situation of Europe in 2008 and 2009 upon the U.S. had the implications for us, which among other things meant the coming of investment and financial capital arrivals, which allowed us to have the best decades in the history of our region. In one way or the other, I believe that this phenomenon, in the case of Latin America, came together with other important facts that I will be mentioning momentarily. But also, before advancing and telling you about Latin America, I would like to delve a little bit further on the sense of today's world and something we might be certain about. It is very difficult to prognosticate, but we must have certain leads that will tell us where will that future world be going through. What is indeed true? First of all, that there will be a new paradigm for development, a new model which basically will be based upon knowledge. This might be labor, raw materials, knowledge, etc., but knowledge will continue to lead the world's economic growth. Another thing which is also true, that at the same time we had a middle-class phenomenon in Latin America, this phenomenon will continue to govern worldwide. The future world is a world of a middle class, and it is not difficult to deal with middle classes that have other demands, different values, different attitudes, and that will result in that politics or policies as themselves will have to see how they can manage a middle-class government. We also have the suffering of emerging countries, an important issue, and which has its political implications, where the BRICS have as a main factor of unity their dimension, but also the feeling of a certain resentment vis-a-vis the way in which they have not been able to become represented in international organizations as they should. But basically speaking, there's a reality in emerging countries today which contribute with over 70% of the world's growth rate, 12 to 14% 20 years ago. Now they're 25% in the case of China, which will be the second power in the world in a few more years. What one would conclude is that within this context, what is most significant is the fact that we are facing the extinction of the world economic power in the history of mankind, from the west to the east and toward the south. If we think of this, it makes it difficult for us to realize what this actually means, but we are seeing not just the actual importance that these countries have vis-a-vis trade trends, financial trends, power distribution in international organizations, and so on, Thereunder, I think there is a whole new situation which we must recognize, because trade among countries of the South is increasing vigorously and will be another very important factor for the movement and thrust of the world's economy. In some way or the other, this world panorama, before going to Latin America, is calling for certain basic corrections on the part of humankind, where political leaders have to, and I admit and I recognize when Carla when the first meeting of the G20 took place, Carla, I believe that those speeches that were made in London, they were hopeful, because we thought that we were awaiting a broadening of the administration power of the world to 20 countries, which represented 75% of the world trade and production, and that could be a new starting point. I believe, and I must say that I'm quite frustrated as regards the G20. It is not complying, it is not meeting with what they offered. Important financial contracts have been carried out, but not enough, and there has been certain legislation as well. But tackling these in-depth issues is something that has not really reached that institution, the G20, which we deem was the new answer to the new world that had to be managed and administered in order to cater to the new international relations. If we look at the issues of international trade particularly, it is indeed important to see that there hasn't been an increase in protectionism as a result of this crisis. There could have been much more, by the way. In some way or the other, the specter of the 50s played a role, but we must necessarily understand that the WHO, which was born as a result of the Uruguay round back in 1986, culminated in the creation of the WHO later on, of the WCO, has been having these problems. The World Trade Organization, WTO. And the director of the WTO indeed made tremendous efforts in order to reach in Bali an agreement, which, although modest, it could rescue the Doha round. However, a few weeks back, a very important country did not support the agreement and truly endangered not just the agreement, but the credibility of the WTO. So there we do have a problem. And there has been a growth throughout the world in the very large number of relationships among and between countries, all of which have a preferential component known as the spaghetti bowl, as commerce specialists call it. And lately, there have appeared two large mega treaties, which are very important. One of the mega treaties is that of the North Atlantic, an investment treaty of the U.S., Canada, and Europe, which accounts for 50% of the gross world domestic product, 5% of commerce. It is a humongous market that wants to go beyond tariffs, because although much progress has been made, it has gone into services, into agriculture, into investments, and so on. It is a huge investment, which is tremendously important. If this contributes toward the strengthening, and what is awaited from this treaty to contribute is very important for both the European Union and the USA, by $100 billion per year and so on, plus the issues of security, we see that these treaties should be carried out within the overall climate of the WTO and not going against the WTO or leaving it aside. The other treaty, which is that of the Pacific, which is very important, dealing with more than 30% of the world's trade that goes through those 12 countries. I think that's the number now. Calls for much regulation beyond intellectual property, which is one of the main issues which is generating the broadest difficulties. But there are countries in the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and so on and so forth. So it is truly a very important adventure. I am not concerned so much that this will be making progress if the world of today, which is so complex, wants to deepen its relations. This is not a negative principle. What would indeed be negative is that it would make the trade world a piecemeal, and that there would be a new commercial or trade relationship, which is not what we have been seeking out throughout so many years. The only thing that we can say is to express a concern as to how there will be a linkage between these two treatises, if that can be negotiated, because we know it is not easy to negotiate such treatises, neither here or in other countries. But this is an issue with regard to trade, which is a matter of concern. Trade has gone down from the high 12% rates, and commerce indeed is the driving element of the world's economy. And this is why indeed we must remain alert as to what may happen there. In some way or the other, if we could draw a conclusion, and when I was speaking about the G20 and these trends of the world trade, that conclusion would be that perhaps the world today is crying out for an important correction of the machinery of international institutions. I remember collaborating with the efforts to revitalize the Security Council at a certain point in time. It's a true shame when we see the number of dangers and the very limited powers that the Security Council has. Those of us who were born at the time of the United Nations saw the first time in the history of humankind there was someone that could control and define the use of force. That was a historic leap taken forward at the Security Council. But indeed, this is no longer so. This is not the reality we're living through. And we see how little does that Security Council weigh when we have to come to grips and to grapple with these very serious problems which appear in the international political scenario. Indeed, I believe that together with this, it is also very important to seek out a redefinition with regards to the international financial institutions. It is my belief that the IMF is already in a process of discussion as to changing power so as to allow in the new emerging powers. Regrettably, this is something that has become stagnant, the U.S. Congress, but there should be a pathway here on which to insist. But there is also another idea, and because of my tremendous affection for regional banks, since I feel very much together with what were almost 20 years of my life. And in the same way that we have to re-examine the international political system, where we have to realign the commercial system, there will be a need to revise the basic objectives of regional banks in one way or the other. And once I had to work, by the way, sometime in the 70s. But in view of this new framework we have today in the world, politically and economically speaking, it might be useful to invite the regional banks to think what would be their role, which is not the one they had 30 or 40 years back, because today we have more markets, greater liquidity, more international investment, and to thus try to locate and rethink the role of regional banking. I would dare suggest that this is something that ought to be pondered so that such banks will truly contribute to becoming inserted in these new realities, coming to grips and facing them, and to thus be able to have a new structure. We believe in an international, we created an international word, Bretton Woods, in the United Nations, and the legal system of The Hague, the GATT, which led to the WTO. All of this is the hallmark of the Western world. But this whole system will have to become adapted to the changes of power in the world. And Carla, do you know what my true concern is and what my conviction is further? That within that change of power, it will not just be a change in participation as regards the capital amounts or quotas, but we will be facing the values, the Western values that we had to build hardly between thousands of years of Judeo-Christian tradition, the Greeks and company, and all these values indeed will be in a new world where not all values are readily accepted. Conciliation of values is paramount in order to be able to build up an international system capable of give peace and to broker this peace. It is important that the West and the Eastern worlds negotiate in order to have a minimum code of conduct that will allow to ensure peace. So my conclusions as regards today's world is, first, a tremendous concern for those political factors, great concern for the geopolitical factors which are impinging upon the world's situation, great concern further for the need to update the international institutions, both political and economic, peacefully. It is not just a matter of power distribution, but also a matter of allowing and giving them greater representativeness and efficacy in dealing with these great challenges with which we were not aware, but which have come before us. If we want to summon our efforts toward peace and a better world, this is the issue that will have to be discussed. Let us now move on to Latin America. This morning we heard this at the seminar I attended, where we heard highly recognized specialists. It's true that Latin America managed to attain many things. 40 or 50 years, and the last decade, by the way, which was truly exceptional. We learned about the well-being and the economies and so on. We had an exceptional growth with a good macro economy and a world which was smiling to us as a result of the prices of raw materials. We brought down poverty, we improved the distribution of income. We were reminded of this morning. In one way or the other, we had an exceptional income or inflow of financial resources when we thought that we would be having $750 billion of reserves, figures which for the presidents of central banks seem to us something which is Ripley's. But we've thought of those amounts, and it means that Latin America in itself is a different Latin America today. That's what we did. But what is it that we did not do? This morning, a mention was made of certain fundamental reforms, such as the fact that we did not make much progress in productivity or the educational system or as regards institutions, but especially, and I will comment on this later on, there are some dangers regarding this situation. Are there some? Yes, there are. Because the drop in the prices of raw materials is already a reality, and I could deal further with this matter, which would have something that would have a tremendous impact upon South America. The investment in Latin America was increased as a result of the interest rate, but the adjustments made by the US of A by way of the quantitative easing will have a problem that will be reflected upon the cost of money. This is what will happen. There will be a low remuneration to savings in the long term, which might result in a negative trend for the economy. So indeed, we will have an increase in the rates that will result in there being capital that will actually go back to places of greater security because of higher profit rather than higher profitability, and investments that might find more adequate destinations. But what is important here is that Latin America, that has made all of this and which learned to manage the economy, which had a serious banking. The problem of the private banking in Latin America, after all the coups in the 90s and so on, led us to learning is now a sanitized banking that contributed to the crisis in 2008, 2009. We practically skipped it. And this is something which speaks very well about Latin America and the efforts made in it. So it is within that context of that world and that specific moment where we have to realize that the tailwinds are not the same we had before, and that therefore we will be having more difficult situations where we will have to see what is the conclusion we can reach, that we will have to look much more carefully our own market, something that we stated also this morning, and also with much more interest to look at the need for economic modernization, to base growth not just merely on the price of raw materials or the income or the arrival of capitals from abroad, but also to seek out the new dynamics in the domestic market. Let us not forget that we have 7 trillion products, 7 trillion in products in Latin America, which is a lot of money. And this means that there's a very powerful market in Latin America that has to be taken advantage of.
And that is why we have to speak about integration, a subject that is part of the title of my presentation. I am very much in favor, I'm enthusiastic about integration. When in 1959, I was young at that time. I was also young at one time. In 1959, yes, that was truly, we had great hope at that point during my youth. I was in Montevideo when ALAC was set up at the Victoria Plaza Hotel, and we truly believed we had done the great step forward. Raúl Previs was behind of all this. He was the gladiator of integration. He pushed the political leaders. He convinced them one by one. First, he spoke with the Central American leaders, where in 1952, I think it was, where he had the first contact. But in one way or the other, it is interesting to see that he was somebody, as an ECLAC director, convinced about the importance of integration. Europe had done the Treaty of Rome by then in 57, and that had a great impact on Latin Americans, and we all had great hopes. And what happened after that? Well, Felix Peña, great economist and specialist in this area from Argentina, Felix said that the hills of disappointment arrived. We were very hopeful with integration. We would go up the mountain with great vitality, enthusiasm, and confidence. The treaties were not complied with. There was a violation of these agreements, and then suddenly we had the downhill curve and the disappointment curve. Unfortunately, these hills of disappointment happened once again in 64 with ALAC, in 64 with the Andean Group, in Mercosur, the Asunción Treaty. Basically, it is generating a number of disappointments today. So what happened? Why in Latin America have we not been successful up to now in going beyond the 19% of regional trade integration? Antonio was saying that the great frustration of his life as an economist was not to have seen a success in integration. And I agree with him. I fully agree with him. I think that in the final analysis, those of us who at that time dreamed, well, in 1959 he was not around, but those of us who were around at that time and thinking about integration, we saw in that an enormous opportunity. And afterwards, we realized what were the mistakes we made, of course. The negotiation mechanisms at that time were product by product. There were no major businessmen in the ALAC meeting, simply the cooks of integration. And there was no concern then about infrastructure. The idea was to take to a regional level import substitution that we had been carrying out at a national level. That failed, and of course we did begin making progress trying to look for new ideas. Now, I wonder why today do we need more than ever integration? For the reasons I just mentioned, because of the directions the world is going in, for instance, and to a certain extent, there are a number of factors that show us that it is essential that our region try to deepen integration. First of all, because we need to increase industrialization in Latin America. In other words, a lot is said about primarization, and it's true. If were it not for the price of raw materials, who knows what we could do? But reindustrialization requires and will lead to skilled labor, and it will allow us to truly grow and to have good manpower, good know-how, technology. So the use of integration will allow us in one way or the other to take advantage of our domestic markets and lead to chains of value. My small country, Uruguay, what can it do to become part of industrialization? Well, it has to become part of Argentinian, Brazilian, and Chilean industries. As China does, 40% of its exports are produced in Taiwan, Vietnam. So, or Japan did it first. The first examples of exports complemented by production in neighboring countries was done in Asia, and they did it very well. We could do the same thing, but it will be difficult that Uruguay could associate, for instance, to a company in Taiwan. It is much easier to find a company in the local market. And there's an example that is being given to us now by Latin American companies. There are 500 multi-Latin corporations, some larger, some smaller, smaller, who have begun investing in other Latin American countries, has also gone to invest in the United States and in Europe, in Canada, and in China. If these 500 companies, with this imperfect system that we have in our integration mechanism, could do that, they are showing that the market is an important potential, a major potential for our possible industrialization initiatives in Latin America. But the important thing, and the first thing, is we want to bet on industrialization. Regional integration is a must. It is something that is essential in order to be able to truly make progress. Second, another important subject is that Latin America must strengthen its international presence. We are a major economic nucleus. We now have ECLAC, through which we can negotiate. We also have the OAS, and with the United States and Canada. We have the organization that governs relationship between Spain and Portugal and Latin America. But it is important that these institutions truly try to have an action in this relationship with all parts of the world, including Africa, a continent of the world that has been taken care of only by Brazil, also Cuba at one point. But actually, it was Brazil that truly had an active policy and presence in the African continent, truly a respectable emerging economy. So the second explanation is that one. The third explanation is that because, to a certain extent, we have to see why we have not made progress in this area. And I would say for two reasons. First, the first reason why we did not make more progress is because maybe we've been imitating Europe too much. We have been associating ourselves with overly ambitious objectives. In the case of Mercosur, for instance, as a common market, to begin with a common external tariff should have been the point of arrival and not the point of departure. The point of departure should have been to deepen integration agreements on infrastructure, to make deeper also agreements on energy cooperation, automobile cooperation. We see this between Argentina and Brazil. That is to integrate the logistics and to create a whole group of agreements that would cement a relationship and that would at some point end up in a truly common market with a truly common external tariff. But this cannot be done from the beginning. And that is one of the reasons, I think, why things didn't work. We were excessively ambitious in trying to go into these type of initiatives in the area of integration. And I think that in a certain way, infrastructure, and by the way, I am happy about what CAF has done. It has made major investments and committed itself in this area. It is betting on regional infrastructure. It is still one of our major objectives. It should be one of our major objectives. We need a point of logistics that we've had in Panama, in Rio de la Plata, in Brazil. In one way or the other, logistics that is that concern for that part of integration, I think, should have been more fertile, and it would have been so if we had done that from the beginning. Today, I think what we have to try to do is to look for more flexibility in the integration mechanisms, but ensure that the objective should be relationships within the region. I also think, well, another area is that our political agreements, all of them, yes, very important, the Mercosur agreements, the ALBA, the Central American agreements, the Caribbean agreements, they all are very specific and very good, but my feeling is that we have been, in a way, too effective in confronting political problems and not so effective in reaching agreements to understand that concessions have to be made to continue with integration. Aníbal Tito always said, many years ago when he was at ECLAC, he said, the arithmetic complex of ALAC, because we would sit around the table and all of us had to gain and win exactly the same and earn the same thing as everybody else. The important thing he said was that everybody should win. It should be a win-win situation, and there not be that many differences. And this is what paralyzed ALAC for a long time. So here, I think we're not really truly having a political vision of what true integration means in Latin America, in a world where we need to have to go in a convoy instead of going in an isolated fashion, and where we have to integrate all of Latin America. Lately, we have seen this new phenomenon of the Alliance for the Pacific Alliance, very important, yes. Countries that are brought together because of their economic, political philosophy. They all have treaties with the United States. They all have treaties with Europe. They're willing to liberate or release 90% of the tariff and develop investments, technical cooperation, etc. Yes, that is very important. But it does not mean that we can't, that they have to go and oppose the Atlantic agreement. No, there has to be a coexistence to bring together what is diverse. It would be truly serious, and I am convinced of that, it would be very serious if this fragmentation that we have seen today in the world's horizon ends up fragmenting Latin America too. Latin America and the Caribbean are a unit. We have to acknowledge each sub-regional identity, yes, but it is still a unit. And therefore, that unity cannot be sacrificed on the basis of these agreements, these regional agreements that could lead to a dispersion of efforts. The countries have to act as a unit to be effective. And the worst thing that could happen to us, is if we were divided from the outside. And I hope that does not happen, which is why I'm saying that political subjects are playing an essential role in that area. So in this area of integration, I repeat and I insist on my vocation as a Latin American. I repeat my conviction that in today's world, this is something very important that will help us to integrate into the world economy. We're not thinking of closing down borders, no, to come together in order to gain productivity, competitiveness, and then go out to the rest of the world too. In this struggle, in one way or the other, the countries that can improve their reciprocal relationships will achieve better results than if they act alone. In Latin America, there are no large countries. When we see them, what we have to do is see ourselves from the world perspective. We're all small, and we have to come together to take advantage of the regional market that has so much GDP, so much output. And I conclude with a brief remark. In order to do all of this, in order to really become part of the world in an intelligent fashion and strengthen regional integration, we have to continue doing fundamental reforms that have been mentioned here repeatedly. We have to have an orderly macroeconomic situation. This is not a question of left or right, but it's a question of common sense to truly manage things well and in an organized fashion. We have to carry out major reforms in the area of education, which is the major challenge in Latin America, the great headache we face, but it's also a great challenge. We cannot think that we will be part of a dynamic future world if we do not train our human resources that are required for this. We need to have a competitiveness battle, which requires to improve the conditions through which we handle infrastructure, technology, and innovation. We know how to do all of that. We know we have to do it. Then the institutions that are truly essential. What kind of state does today's Latin America require? It requires a state like it requires a responsible and efficient market. But we require a visible hand of the state. What kind of state do we require? And finally, how do we go and confront social problems in a region where improvement has been made, but where there could be much, much more improvement? Well, Carla, that's basically what I wanted to say, to try to make a presentation under the title of this conference. I don't know if I've been of assistance, but at least I wanted to convey some of my personal opinions after a few decades of growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. You have given us a spectacular blueprint. Just next year, we'll come back and we will report all the things that we have accomplished.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.